Hey guys, it's Penguin here, and welcome back to another gold making video. In today's video, we are going to be covering everything you need to know about Dragonflight leatherworking. And this is just super exciting because if you guys have been following my last few videos, this is officially the last Dragonflight profession we need to cover. Also, if you're watching this the day it releases, Dragonflight comes out in about 7-ish hours, depending on when you're watching this, which is super exciting as well. So with that being said, if you guys are trying to prep for Dragonflight and you want to go watch another profession, I can officially say that all other professions are out. So I will leave that playlist in the description, and feel free to ask me any questions that you might have. Also, before we dive into the video, I do have a quick little announcement. As you guys may or may not know, I live stream on Twitch, and I have gotten accepted into the Support a Streamer event. This means that tonight I will be live, and I will be live for the next few days, streaming Dragonflight. And if you guys want to stop by, if you watch the stream for 4 hours, then you will get yourself the Feldrake mount for completely free. Yes, this is the TCG mount. And if you guys do want to gift 2 subs to my channel, you can get yourself the Harvest Golem pet. Either way, if you guys just want to hang out and, have some fun during launch, or you guys do want to get yourself those rewards, I will be live tonight for launch and for many days after. So I will leave my Twitch in the description, and really guys, thank you so much. It's because of you that I get this opportunity. But everybody, let's get into this video. And so up first, as always, let's talk about the pros and cons of leatherworking. And people like to joke that I left the best for last, but there are a lot of pros with this profession. Up first, the most obvious one is that this is an armor profession, and armor is always in demand. If you are somebody who needs crafted gear, you have to go to one of the few armor professions, and there is a lot of leather and mail wearers out there. And that right there kind of brings us to our second point, is not only are you crafting armor, but this profession deals with leather as well as mail. And as you guys know, there is a ton of people who wear leather already in the game, and then also we have evokers, which is the new class/race who also wears mail. So that is a lot of demand. Lots of people are going to want to get their hands on this gear, which is amazing. Also, what you guys will notice is not only is there a ton of variety in gear itself, there is so many different categories, there's also more than just armor. So if you're somebody who is not super into armor, there's still other options that you can craft. Now, kind of backtracking that statement I just said, I would say the only con to leatherworking is that even though there's other things to craft, it is very armor heavy. So, if you guys do not want to do armor, if you guys want to avoid the crafting order system, I would not recommend this as your first choice. Now, also another side point, like I mentioned, there are a lot of options, which is great for gold making, but if you're a little bit indecisive, this might not be the best for you. But that's all we have for there, and let's move on to requirements. And so moving on to reputation, I kind of have some bad news. Now, up first, you guys are going to see the photo on screen, but you will have to farm reputation for the Tuskarrs as well as the Centaurs. You will see that there is a large amount of recipes coming from both those factions. Now, unlike other professions in the past that I have covered recently, all of these, I would say, are very important recipes. For example, a ton of the best in slot profession gear that you can craft for others is tied to rep. So if you're somebody who wants to focus on profession gear, you really have to farm rep. Besides the fact that all of these are worth getting, you also have a single item locked behind Valdrakken Accord. So even though it's one item, that's technically an additional reputation that you need to grind out. Then, kind of following that same path, you also have one item coming from the Artisans Consortium, as well as one item coming from the Cobalt Assembly. So you are almost rep grinding every single one, so that can be a downside to many people, but of course depends on what you're trying to focus on when crafting. And so that brings us to our best in slot profession equipment. Now if you guys go back and pause at the recipes or look at the spreadsheet down below and compare them to all of the leatherworking on this page, you will realize all of those recipes are basically locked behind reputation. But in terms of leatherworking, you will be needing to buy things from blacksmiths. As you guys know, leatherworking is a primary profession, so you have the opportunity to craft 2 accessories, or I should say equipped 2 accessories as well as 1 tool. Those are the Kazgarite Leatherworker's Toolset and the Kazgarite Leatherworker's Knife. Despite them having leatherworking in the name, don't get confused, those are crafted by blacksmithing. And then lastly, you have the Masterwork Smock, which comes from leatherworking. So you need to either have a blacksmith in your alt army, or you're going to have to order those through the crafting order system. But a huge thing to note is leatherworkers themselves are going to have the opportunity to supply 6 different professions with their own crafted gear. So if you're somebody who's very, very interested in that market, this will be great for you. Up next, before we dive into recipes, I do just want to talk about the reagents. And so if you guys are familiar with leatherworking in the past, you guys know that leatherworking and skinning play off each other very, very well. So any sort of skinning material that you can get from, gathering the skinning, that is likely used in leatherworking. And so because of that, there are a ton of miscellaneous, rare, different type of recipes, but the foundation of this profession is built on leather as well as scales. For the most part, you're going to be using resilient leather, and then there's a kind of rarer version of that as well. And then there's the adamant scales, which also has a rarer version, which is a different type of hide. And so as we go through everything, you guys may notice some other additional rare items, but for the most part, you're dealing with those 4 different types of items. And so here we are officially in game, and let's go through these recipes. Now you guys are going to notice we're basically going to be going over the same type of thing twice, because there is leather in male versions, but hopefully I'll try to make this as simple as possible. And so up first we do have just generic leather armor, and you will notice there are 2 different sets. Up first, we have the Pioneer set. Depending on the item, it's either Pioneer's Practiced or just Pioneer's Leather. And this is just your kind of generic leveling as well as just like base level 70 set. Nothing special, it's rare quality, it uses just basic leather as well as kind of that rarer reagent, and just really nothing special. You'll unlock this by just simply leveling up leatherworking. On top of that, you also have the Lifebound set, which is the generic epic quality leather set. So right here, you guys can take a look. It's BOP, has 2 random stats, no sort of already put in embellishments, which is kind of those, equipping bonuses. However, you do have the options to potentially add those. So I'm not saying, this can never have stats, it just doesn't have it by default. Also keep in mind, there's no sort of uniquely equipped or anything like that. So this set comes from specializations, which we'll talk about later on, but this is just kind of overall your generic epic quality set. Up next, we have that same sort of system, however with male armor. So we have the Trailblazer set instead of the Pioneers. You guys will notice this is using the basic scales as well as the rarer scale version, which is a different type of hide. And then also you have the Flamed Touched items, which yet again is just the, epic quality version of generic gear. Of course, you can add secondary stats, embellishments, improve item level, but these are just generic pieces. Also, scrolling back at the top, we have both bracers here, so if you're looking at these sets and realize there's no bracer, it's because I have them learned up top, so disregard that. Up next, we have profession equipment. So I quickly want to make note of this one right here. This is your most basic, just kind of, the basic quality of the smock, which is a leatherworking accessory, but we do have this one learned, which is why it's up here. But if we scroll down, we can look, and as you guys can see, there is a ton of options. If we kind of stay, close to the bottom right here, we have our basic BOE versions, nothing super spectacular, and we have Alchemist, we have Blacksmithing, we have Jewel Crafters, we have Engineering, we have Skinning, we have Herbalism, as well as Skinning. So we just have a ton of different items available right here. Then on top of that, we also have our best in slot versions. which you guys may notice these from other profession guides, as well as that picture that I show during the reputation and equipment section. But all of these mostly come from reputation, and these are just your best in slot BOP versions. Up next, we have a singular weapon. Now, before you get sad and say, oh no, where's the epic version? It is coming, but in just our generic weapon section, we only have just the generic rare quality bow. So for the hunters out there are items for you. You'll notice it using that basic leather and other crafting reagents. And so this is where we get into the interesting items of leatherworking. And so leatherworking this time around has different elemental pieces. If you guys are familiar with tailoring or blacksmithing that we went over, you guys noticed that there were kind of like the Azure Weave set or the Chronocloth set that was a specific set bonus. They had specific equipping bonuses. It's that same thing, but with different elements. And we will kind of see how this works in just a second. So up first, we just have our generic elemental patterns, and these are just different pieces of gear with different bonuses. Very similar to other things we've seen in the past, but right here, as you guys can see, this is also, apologize for the blinking tooltips, but we can see this is a part of the Horizon Strider set, and if you have 2 of this set, you gain that special critical damage and healing bonus. But these are uniquely equipped, BOP, and a little bit more unique than that generic pieces. I'm just going to hover over the different tooltips, so feel free to pause whenever you need, but you will notice that there's a lot of set variety, so you do have many choices, depending on what you kind of need. Also, just to backtrack, as you can see, there's kind of a male set, which is that Horizon Striders, but also you have the Playful Spirit, which is leather. So, there's availability to both sets of people. Moving on, we have our Bestial patterns, which yet again falls under that elemental tree, but a lot of this is PvP focused. So automatically you guys can tell that by all of this Crimson Combatant gear, and that's what we're going to start with. So right here we have our leather versions. This is very similar to everything you've seen in other professions, but you see that Infurious Hide right there, which is kind of that alerter saying, hey, this is a PvP item, if you couldn't tell by the name or the tooltip. Same thing, we have the same exact version, however it's using Infurious Scales because this is the male equipment. Continuing with that same pattern, we have the Infurious set, which once again, you can tell by the types of reagents we are using, also by the tooltip, but this is your more, uniquely equipped pieces with a specific bonus. I'll let you guys look at all these tooltips, so feel free to pause if necessary. Then for the people who are looking for their bow, this is where it is. So even though this is not technically a PvP bow, it is in this section. So I say it's mostly PvP, but not all PvP, I should say. But this is your high tier bow if you're looking for it. Keep in mind you can add all of these embellishments if you want. Then lastly, you just have some allied sets. So once again, just has some other bonuses. Moving on, we have our last set of kind of elemental armor, and this is the Decayed items. Now these are very interesting, as you will see, there's this sort of like required altar going on, which is pretty cool. And another thing that you will notice, and this kind of applies to all elemental pieces, I apologize for not mentioning this earlier, but most pieces come from drops or just other scenarios outside of your profession windows. So right here, this comes from Decayed Creatures, however, it is a BOE. If we look at the other set of gear, these come from winning PvP battles, because this is your PvP set. But if we go back up to here, you can see this drops from bosses, etc. Now, of course, there are some that drop from specializations, which we'll talk about, but a lot of these kind of specialized pieces of gear come from bosses, reputation, drops, stuff like that. But going back to the Decayed, these are a little bit unique. As I mentioned, they have that required altar, which is a little bit more harder to get, but also they have some very specific abilities. Now you guys can, read the equipped bonus, but you will notice on the bottom of all of these, it says, hey, these effects can be increased by 100%, if you equipped it with a specific armor patch, which we'll talk about in just 1 second. But this could be a very, very cool trend. If you can increase your items by 100%, that is awesome. Now, a lot of these, once again, are harder to get. They come from certain decayed creatures, but I'll let you guys just look. They kind of follow the same trend as other items. And so we're going to skip reagents real quick because I want to talk about that specific patch right here. So we're going to move on to optional reagents. And so of course we just have a generic optional reagent that you can add a specific ability, but the toxified armor patch is what we want to see. Right here, as you guys can see, you can equip this to one of those decayed armor pieces, and that is how you increase that item's ability. So right here, what we'd have to do is infuse with power. Keep in mind that this comes from, having to unlock it through your specialization system. But this is how you apply that armor patch in order to get that buff. I just wanted to talk about it because armor patch, a lot of people may confuse them with armor kits, but it is technically a crafting reagent. Moving back to normal reagents, these are kind of the specific rarer piece of items that you have been seeing in our crafting recipes. So right here, up first, these are actually related to inscription dragonflight glyphs. If you guys have seen the inscription video, you guys know that scribes have the opportunity to craft different dragon writing cosmetics, and these are tied to that as well. Another important note is that this framework right here that you're basically upgrading comes from blacksmithing. But then these are where we have our elemental reagents, or our elemental infused reagents, which is the official name by Blizzard. And so these are used in a ton of these special sort of items, and you will notice some of these names. So right here we just have some earth and frost to create the earth shine. Then we have frostbite, which is decay and frost. Then we have infurious. Infurious, what does that mean? PvP. What does that mean? Awakened ire. So there we go. That's actually how you craft that item. Then you have the scales version. And lastly, you just have some other rare versions. So a lot of these gear, if we go back to, let's just say this one right here, as you guys can see, this elemental piece uses that special scale. This one uses the other type of hide, and so on. So all of these kind of relate to the different higher quality items. Up next, we just have the classic finishing reagent that all classes can make, and then we have our glorious armor kits. Leatherworkers love their armor kits, players love leatherworking armor kits, and these are there for them. So right here we have the fierce one, which you guys can read. Keep in mind this is a quality 2, so the stats are not going to be the exact same depending on other qualities, but this does come from a specific quest. Then right here we have the frosted version, which is that recipe you get from the Cobalt Assembly, and then lastly you have your more generic version that kind of anybody can get their hands on. Then we do have one sort of drum. This just comes from leatherworking, very, very simple. So we do have our drums here, so we're not getting ditched this expansion. And then lastly, we do have 3 fun toys. Right here, you guys can read what these do, but we do have some fun stuff if you guys are collectors. But that is all the recipes that we have for leatherworking. So let's transition into leveling so we can finally talk about specs. And so with leveling, I do have a few things to say. Now you guys will be staring at the path on screen, but to start off, I can confidently say that you should be able to hit level 60 in your profession very, very easily with your trainer learned recipes. Now technically you could push this to 65 if you really needed that 5 extra skill, however that, last 5 is going to be a bit more expensive. And so you guys will likely notice this already by the amount of text on screen, but you kind of have a lot of options with leatherworking. And that is because you kind of have a leather route as well as a mail route. So there's a lot of options where you're either crafting both for a specific step, or you can craft either or. So just for example, let's say, patch releases and at the time of leveling, you find leather a lot cheaper than scales, so you can buy a lot more leather and kind of go the leather route. And of course, vice versa, if, scales become a lot cheaper than leather. So you kind of can mix and match if necessary, but that is why there's so many options, because you kind of have a leather leveling path and then a mail leveling path. Now, with all of that confusingness, whatever path you decide, you're going to get a guaranteed 17 knowledge points, which is pretty awesome. Also, if you guys decide to double up, so, for example, on step 2, it says to craft, one type of boot. If you want to pay a little bit more and craft 2 types of boots, then you can double the amount of knowledge points you're going to gain, because you're actually crafting double than what you really need. So feel free to double up, spend a little bit more gold if you want, but at the very base level, you'll get about 17 points. And so I know that was a lot of talking, but you can find, that leveling path in the spreadsheet down below, and let's move on to specializations. And so specializations are pretty exciting, and also, even though there's 4 different categories, honestly, this is probably one of the most simple out of all professions. Now, up first, I'm going to get kind of the generic stuff out of the way that I'm not necessarily going to put with specific builds. And actually, hold on, I want to back up real quick. Before we even talk about specializations, let me go over a few disclaimers. And so the first thing I want to mention is that knowledge points are permanent. For example, if I unlock this tree and put 2 points into discipline and hit apply changes, that is permanent. I cannot get rid of this. There is no way to respec. I am doomed. I cannot remove these at all. However, that is okay because you can learn everything. Now, of course, you are time gated by how many knowledge points you have, so you are, time gated in that sense, but it is okay if you accidentally put 2 points into discipline where you meant to put it into mail crafting, because you're not limited in terms of what you can actually unlock. At the end of the day, by the end of the expansion, we're going to have all of this maxed out and more with the incoming patches. So it's not the end of the world if you decide, this was a bad path, let me start a new one. It's okay, it won't hurt you in the long run. And so, going back to our generic points, let's start with leatherworking discipline, which is kind of just your generic leatherworking skills in general. Up first, we have our overall main tree, which is just skill bonuses for all leatherworking patterns. Right here, we have, plus 5 skill, more skill, plus 10, and lastly, you're going to gain a 20% speed increase, which is awesome, as well as some inspiration and resourcefulness. So, just overall skill and stat increases. If we go right here to the sheer mastery of leather, this is just your resourcefulness bonuses. So all of these have to do with resourcefulness, so feel free to pause if you like. Then the same thing happens, but you have it with inspiration. So same exact thing as the other subspec, but you're just gaining inspiration instead of resourcefulness. And that is really kind of the only 2 generic options you have with leatherworking. And this is where we're going to transition into our first build, which is consumables and reagents. And so we are already in the correct tree that we need. We need to go to leatherworking discipline, and you will either want to go into curing and tanning or bonding and stitching. What you will have to do in the first place, no matter what, is put at least 5 points into discipline so you guys can gain a sub-spec. Now, in this case, let's just say that we decide to go curing and tanning first. This is going to be dealing with armor kits and reagents. So right here, you're going to gain a plus 20 multicraft, you're going to gain plus 10 inspiration, plus 40 multicraft, inspiration, multicraft, and lastly, you're going to be able to use finishing reagents. But this is great if you guys are going to be focusing on reagents, which is likely something you're going to want to mass produce. Following those same lines, we have bonding and stitching. And this is where we kind of part into 2 different builds. Now, in terms of the category we're currently focusing on, which is consumables, this helps with drums. So plus 20 multicraft with drums is super nice. However, you will also notice this is the tree for bows and profession accessories. So if you are somebody who wants to focus on weapons or profession accessories, this is also the tree for you. I know we're focusing on consumables, but bows and accessories kind of fit in the same thing, so this is kind of two builds in one. But you gain more multi-craft with drums, and it just kind of swaps each term. At the very end, you'll also be able to use finishing reagents on bows and profession accessories. So, to backtrack, if you guys are focused on consumables, you want both of these, this one right here for armor kits, this one right here for drums, but if you are also interested in weapons and accessories, bonding is for you as well. Moving on to our second build is leather armor. And I will just straight up say, if you guys have seen tailoring or blacksmithing, it's the exact same thing. If we unlock this tree immediately, you're going to gain some bonuses for crafting leather armor. Right here, you can actually use optional reagents for most leather pieces. Right here, you'll gain just general, inspiration, resourcefulness, inspiration, and lastly, you'll gain a speed increase as well as some additional stats. So, once again, this follows the similar pattern to all other professions. And like I always say before, we don't have a best in slot list right now. We can't say, okay, leather belts are going to be best in demand. We just don't know that. But whatever you decide to ultimately put your points in is the same sort of system. You're going to have to put 10 points in right here to unlock one side, and you either have, chest pieces, helmets, shoulders, and wrist, or you have pants, gloves, belts, and boots. So whatever one you pick, let's just say we go here, you're going to gain, yet again, significant increases for those specific types of pieces. Inspiration, you guys are going to gain resourcefulness, inspiration, and then lastly, you're going to be able to use finishing reagents. And so, once again, if we continue, you're going to have to put in 10 points right here, and then you can choose your final subspec. Let's say we want to focus on pants first. Immediately on learning this subspec, we're going to gain that generic, mythic, quality set of gear. So for leather, that is the Lifebound set, which is all right here, specifically this item right here, and it works for all of these. So right here, gloves, we'll get the gloves, we'll get the belt, and so on. If we decide to continue to put points in, we're going to gain additional skill for crafting leg armor, some additional skill, more skill, and finally, finishing reagents. And this applies to every single category. Just to show you one more example, if you ultimately unlock chest pieces, right there, you're going to gain the Lifebound chest piece, you're going to gain additional skill, and lastly, finishing reagent. So it is the same sort of trend. And so this brings us to our third build, which is going to be the quickest build in the world, and it is mail, which means it is the exact same thing. So, listen back to what I just said about leather, but every time I say leather, replace that with mail. So you have your generic just kind of increases with the speed crease at the end, and then if you kind of, dive into gauntlets, you're going to learn the flame-touched handguards, which is that mail version right here. And then, of course, more skill, and lastly, finishing reagents. So if you want to focus on mail, it's the same sort of thing. And so lastly, this is the interesting stuff, which is the primordial, which is all of your elemental crafting. So if you guys are interested in these special sets, which most people are, it is all of this stuff kind of towards the end. This is where you likely may want to specialize. Up first, as always, we just have our generic increases for these specific pieces. So if you read this tooltip right here, this is going to be additional skill when crafting elemental, bestial, and decayed. So this goes for all types of elemental items. I know, I apologize, it's confusing because there's an actual elemental category, but when I talk about elemental, I mean all three together. And so right here, you're going to gain inspiration, resourcefulness, inspiration, resourcefulness, and lastly, you're going to be able to use a specific finishing reagent, and lastly, a speed increase. Now, if you guys are somebody who wants to focus specifically on that decaying items, which is that final category we looked at, you're going to want to focus into this tree. Right here, immediately, you're going to unlock a special decayed recipe, which is that offhand weapon right here, if I can find it. There we go. You're immediately going to learn this item, and then it kind of follows that same trend. Right here, you're going to gain additional inspiration when you're crafting decayed patterns, as well as decayed infused reagents. Same thing, you're going to gain more skill, more resourcefulness. Right here, you're going to gain that armor patch, which is that optional crafting reagent that you need to apply to this gear to increase their stats, which is very, very important. And lastly, you're going to gain finishing reagents. So if you guys are focusing on decayed, I recommend putting immediately 20 points in. If you're somebody who wants to focus kind of more on the PvP bestial side of things, then yet again, this is the tree for you. Immediately, you're going to unlock that bow recipe, so that high quality bow, and the same thing sort of works. You're going to gain skill for the bestial patterns, as well as the blood or ire infused reagents. More inspiration, plus 10 skill, plus 10 resourcefulness. You're going to gain that Fang Adornments, which is another crafting reagent. And then lastly, finishing reagents. Then lastly, we have our final kind of category, which is the actual elemental category, which is right here. And this is where it kind of follows that same pattern. Immediately upon learning, you're going to gain the Flaring Cowl, which is the one that is right here. And then, of course, more inspiration, skill, resourcefulness, skill, and lastly, finishing reagents. And so yeah, technically this is build 4, but you could split this up into 3 different builds. If you're somebody who wants to, do leather armor crafting plus decayed, then of course you got your 2 trees sought after. Maybe you want to focus on consumables, you focus over here. Maybe you want to do, mail boots, but leather chest pieces. You guys can mix and match to whatever you like, but I apologize for how many times I have said finishing reagents, but we are officially done. So everybody, thank you so much for watching not only this video, but also any other videos you guys have seen. This series has been super fun to make, and I hope it's been just as fun and informative for you guys. As always, if you have any questions that I didn't answer, or you have any suggestions, feel free to leave them in the comments down below. And let me know if you are excited about this profession. Of course, by the time this video is out, we are literally hours before launch, and potentially you may even be seeing this in Dragonflight. So I hope you guys are excited for launch, I hope it's fun for you, and I will see you guys in the Dragon Isles. But everybody, thank you so much, and have a good day.